The topic of identity, I think, does always make people feel a little bit warm because we all want to be validated. We all want to feel seen, and a lot of these labels kind of help us do that. And I know we've been talking a lot about like gatekeeping and about letting people use these labels as they want to, but maybe part of that experience of feeling seen is when a label is sort of like earned or bestowed. We've been talking, I think, mostly about gender and orientation, but I want to say that in the kink community, terms like leather daddy or master in the pup play community or some of these things are really important. I think because they're coming from somebody else. Do y'all have any thoughts about how those kinds of adjectives fit into this conversation?
I just want to know what a Viking power sub bottom was. I think that was in your notes there, and I'm
Poly
like,
Viking power bottom. Come
yeah,
on,
yeah, yeah.
that's a old cut. I guess deep cut inside joke for secular sexuality viewers because we have talked a lot on this show about different adjectives and how to know which ones suit us and how to find those adjectives. And this might be the first time that we've really discussed the potential dangers of those adjectives while, wanting to kind of play around the edges of that because gatekeeping, bad, offering some sense of feeling seen by a partner who wants to like let you know, no, you are this thing to me. You are the master to me. You are the submissive to me, or whatever labels fit in your relationship. I don't know, that's a different kind of a horse of a different color in my mind.
Still didn't
Yeah,
tell me what a Viking power poly sub
You'll have to
bottom is, but
check out
go
the
ahead,
gotta
episode.
Laura.
use your
Go ahead, Laura.
imagination,
In the
Nate. You
show
know what each of
notes.
the words mean.
Okay, fair enough.
No, but to Christy's original question, I think we need to be really careful with understanding where the label comes from and what it describes, right? Like you can't just label yourself a doctor if you're not a doctor. You can't just I know there was controversy a while ago about a woman who identified as black, although her skin was white, and she didn't have black heritage. Um, we have to be very, very careful with what does the label say about me. And so when you talk about things like daddy and master in certain kink communities, those are roles that a person plays. And so you can't just go in and say, I'm this if you're not actually that, right? If you're playing the role, albeit new at it, then I guess there's this like gray area where, well, have I earned the label or not? If it's my first time or first few times I'm taking on this role. I don't know where that line would be, and I would hate to be the person to determine when a specific label applies. But if you're not playing a specific role, then you have to respect that that label doesn't apply to you. Otherwise, it really does sort of muddy the water, and it really does take a sense of power away from the label. Like when we talk about using the word triggered, where there's a medical term triggered, and when someone says, "Oh, you're triggering me right now you're really just taking that term and you're watering it down. Um, so I think when we talk about labels and whether or not we get to use them, there needs to be a sense of honesty, at least in the sense of, is it a role that I'm playing or is it how I identify myself? Is it something that I can play around with and I can say like, well, I think this applies to me, or does it really not apply to you? Like I think we need to have sort of a sense of honesty when it comes to that.
Yeah.
Honesty and I think compassion, right? Because
Yes.
it is about being sincere and not just like ripping off somebody else's label or trying to like force your way into a community that is not available or appropriate to you, while also being okay with some of the squishiness and the ineffability and confusingness of all of these kinds of things. Sinn, do
Yeah.
you have anything to add there?
Yeah, that's kind of like what I was talking about when I was kind of like, is it okay for me to use the they them pronoun from time to time? Kind of having that sort of worry, you know what I mean? Um, but I mean, I think that what you said, Laura, about like being honest, we hope that's what everyone's doing, but I think it's so important because it's just that like you know, that's the fuel that the haters use. They're like, oh, I really, well, I identify as a helicopter. So, and I'm just, that's so obviously dishonest. And that's so obviously weapon to invalidate what people are saying about who they are. So
Mm.
that's why I think like that integrity of that honesty is so important, not to just jump on something because you want to be in that group, but to make sure that that's really how you feel, because we need less of that, of those haters.
Yeah, there is something of like a reasonable person standard here, like
Yeah.
a little bit of contractualism in the way we use these adjectives. Nate, did you have anything to add before we start to wrap things up for the night?
I think you three summed it up beautifully.
Sure. Well, before Laura takes us out the door, I guess I just wanted to hear if any of y'all had any movies or records or books or anything else that was really significant to your journey, maybe in kind of discovering your own labels, or perhaps a resource that you think might be helpful in somebody else finding their labels. Nate, do you want to start there?
Well, other than issues of Playgirl hidden under my bed and the song I mentioned earlier, this may be a bit of a cheat, but I'd say go back and watch the SecX episodes with Polly Viking Power Bottoms, because I know that is straight where I'm going after this show. But I will turn it over.
Yeah, and Sinn, what about you? Anything that you'd like to shout out here?
Well, I mean, I guess when you first mentioned this question, I was interpreting it in like a little bit of a different way. But like, so, I mean, for me, how I sort of discovered that I wasn't a straight person was the movie Clueless when I was about 12-ish, like 11, 12. And I was
I
like,
think a lot of people maybe found out that they weren't straight watching Clueless.
because I all of a sudden I was like, I don't want to be Alicia Silverstone. I don't want to be like her. I just want to be kissing her maybe. And that was when I was first like cracking my mind open to like even having fantasies in that direction. So that was big for me. And another big part of my identity is the sex workerness of me. And I knew that I wanted to like be a naked person in the world when I was much younger. And there was this book that I read, I think it was even before I was 18, and it's called Strip City by Lily Barana. And I was just reading that, and it's her story of being a stripper when she was younger, getting out of it, toying with the idea of getting back into it. And it's not very explicit or anything, but it was a really like formative for me to see a intelligent, thoughtful person talk about sex work in this way. And of course, we've come so far from then. I mean, that was like 20 years ago, but or more. But so I think in general, just sort of watching movies and reading books that just sort of showcase various types of experiences can help you figure out what resonates with you.
Yeah, fair to say. I think being curious and just sampling is perhaps the most important thing. Like, dive into queer media, dive into different types of pornography, listen to people from all kinds of communities. We've talked before on this show about the behemoth and the kind of the awkward elephant in the room that the Dan Savage's Savage Lovecast can be for the queer community. But I'll definitely acknowledge that listening to that show for years and just hearing all kinds of different voices talk about every which type of sex or orientation or adjective imaginable opened my eyes in so many ways. And so many of those things started to resonate and were worth exploring.
Same, so much same. Like, I know that it's a touchy subject for some people, but I am such a huge fan of Dan Savage and his Lovecast. And like, I just feel that it helped even crack my mind open in so many ways. Like the way I thought about how relationships should be, what cheating did mean. And just that podcast, listening to it over the years, it just like opened my mind in so many ways. So I agree with you, Christy. Like, that's a great place to start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't even know that Savage Love was that controversial, and it was even one of my "What's Turning You On" for one of my previous appearances.
Oh, yeah.
But I would say to that end, just seeking out sex positive podcasts or YouTube channels or media in general, like if there's not an episode on anal, just go on to the next podcast, right? Because if it's so cut and dry, if it's so like this is how it's got to be, and they don't explore other forms of sexuality, move on to the next podcast and find something else. Until you find something that's willing to explore just the plethora of the human sexual experience. But yeah, I learned a lot about my sexuality just through the college course. It was the anthropology of sex and gender. So I would say like it's not the funnest. It's a more academic way of approaching sexuality, but it was one of my favorite classes, and it opened up so much. So I would say to people, explore whatever opportunities or avenues you have to explore. For my kids, honestly, it was RuPaul's Drag Race. Like we started watching that, and it opened up so much conversation, and we all loved the pageantry of it and the glam of it and just the music and everything. But it was a really fun way to just sort of break the ice on sexuality and gender and expression. So it could be any number of things, but yeah, that's really what worked for us in our household. It looks
love
like we're
You
that
coming
better
up
so
on the
work.
end though.
much.
Yeah, you better work. But I have some more stuff that I want to discuss here. I want to discuss Sinn and her links, and I got some other links to show off first. But before I get to our links, I want to talk about Sinn. Where can people find you?
Best place, sin-sage.com. That's my personal website. It's free to look at. You can check. You find all my other links there. Of course, on the screen right now, you see my link tree. That's going to have all my links. Twitter, I'm very active. I'd love to hear from you about this episode. Please reach out to me at any time on Twitter at @sinsage. And then, if you got a couple bucks to spare, join my OnlyFans. It's a fun time.